Kathryn, thank you so much for being here with me today. I'm so excited to introduce you to our viewers and to our listeners and to talk about you and to talk about El Signo Vacío, or the empty sign. And I want to ask about that right away, and I also want to let people know that we met because you are a Creative Capital Awardee. And Creative Capital is one of my clients, and I had the blessing, the privilege of facilitating the artist orientation this year. And I was so blown away by your presentation as a Puerto Rican, as somebody that spent time in La Base Ramey is what we called it. What can you tell us about the project? And then, of course, I'll ask you more about you.
Okay. The project has been in process for 5 years now. And it originated with the question, for me, why is there a former Air Force Base, now U.S. Border Patrol site with my last name, Ramey? And when I first started doing research, it led me down a variety of different paths, some of which were fruitful, some of which I have abandoned. But as I traveled to Puerto Rico and met artists and activists and realized the contemporary situation, the film shifted from an interest in specifically being about the base to thinking about the U.S. occupation and the colonial situation now.
Thank you. Thank you for taking that on. And there's so much to unpack there, and I can't wait to get into it. It is powerful. It's like we were talking before the call about kind of how mixed blessings come along. So, for example, what I have in mind right now is Hurricane Maria came and devastated the island. And it devastated the island very shortly after the government's bankruptcy was announced, right? And so it was like hurricane number one, financial hurricane number two, climate disaster. And Puerto Rico has entered the American psyche in a way that it hasn't for a long time. It has been so ignored. And so to know that people in a country are, even the media using words like colony, it's a powerful thing. So I'm really happy to hear that you are shedding a light on imperialism and colonialism on the island. And I'm curious to know, like, what are you learning? What have you learned?
Well, it's like most people, despite the fact that I was a nice, as my friend Sophia says, a nice liberal white lady, I really had no idea of mostly the extent of the resistance against the colonialism. I understood from my U.S. stateside white perspective how Puerto Rico had been acquired by the United States and how it had been used as a military base, multiple military bases, to secure, and please in air quotes, secure a certain kind of dominance in the Caribbean and also over the South America and Central America. But I didn't realize, because I had not listened closely enough to voices talking about the Puerto Rican experience, both in the diaspora in the United States, but what interested me most was in Puerto Rico. And once I started listening to those voices and reading those literatures, and it just opened me up to a whole new way of thinking about colonialism and also efforts to decolonize oneself.
Beautiful, beautiful. That is so important. And that perspective, decolonizing oneself, is so key when you talk about being a nice liberal white lady, right? I think, and it's not just exclusive to nice liberal white ladies, but there's something to the discourse of liberalism as it is dominant that kind of assumes a baseline of fairness, right? Like it says, well, we can have this debate within this like ideological space that often ignores or seems to not even see what it's founded upon, right?
Right.
And colonialism, imperialism, in the same way as things like racism and indigenous genocide. Like these three things are
Globalism.
underlying, yeah.
Globalism. I mean, what is the relationship? And the film is, I think, the film is trying to thread these things together. Historic colonialism, contemporary manifestations of colonialism tied in with capitalism, globalism, and frankly, what another friend calls the visitor economy, tourism, the way in which the threads of colonialism are woven on the island to hide the impact of colonialism, specifically in terms of how it operates from my perspective, from white folks from the U.S. coming there, whether it's to make money as through industry, whether it's as tourists, however they're coming, their position as colonizers is made invisible to them,
Right.
through these supposedly, liberatory narratives around democracy and, economic incentives and all these other narratives. They fail to see how they, and myself included, how I am just being there as a tourist, engaging and participating in colonizing.
Yeah.
And how to really, I mean, in many ways, the film hopes to bring awareness to people to how to decolonize themselves, because it's not just those who are colonized who need to be decolonized. The colonizers, possibly even more.
That is a powerful perspective. I want to kind of track back and talk a little bit about the base, my relationship to it, your relationship to it. And I feel compelled to also mention, before I do that, one of the striking things is that Puerto Rico, the Caribbean, Puerto Rico holds some of the most fertile land on the planet right now. And yet it doesn't have food independence.
Yes.
Right? It can't feed itself, even though that is its greatest.
And food is exorbitantly expensive.
Right.
Versus how much the actual individual can make in any job.
Right, and so it's really interesting that is a direct byproduct of an economic model, of a development idea that said, you all should manufacture these things while when you import food from somewhere else because that's not your core strength. And like, it's this microcosm, this example of how the way in which we look at economies and at the idea of development is so fraught, right? In which actually the story of freedom is taking freedom away,
Right.
as you have already articulated. It is harrowing in a way to learn that this base is now a Border Patrol center, right? I remember being in Puerto Rico and seeing the Border Patrol vans and thinking how ludicrous it is, right? It's an island, right?
Right.
It's like an interesting thing, right? Like the border is water there, which is it's kind of
right. But they're not guarding Puerto Rico's border for Puerto Ricans. They're guarding this imagined U.S. border that extends deep into the Caribbean and around parts of Central and South America. I mean, that's what they're guarding.
Yeah, of course. And it's just, when you see it with your eyes, you realize how ludicrous it all is. Ramey, so I have childhood memories of visiting La Base Ramey, like we called it. I have an uncle and an aunt that lived there. They weren't enlisted while they lived there, so it must have been some moment at which they were renting homes. This particular uncle had himself gone to a military academy, so I think he had a thing for this kind of thing. But I remember spending time there because it's a sister that my mother's very close to, so we were in San Germán, that we're in Aguadilla, it was like an hour away. And I just remember the energy of a space where like all the houses were uniform, right?
Right.
And I also similarly have these beautiful memories of going to the beach, to the coast in that part, which wasn't exactly a beach, a balneario in which you like go swimming, right? It's just the coast, and have these beautiful memories of the water coming in and forming these pools with the rocks and seeing the tropical fish in those pools and being able to put your feet there and like literally like this beautiful, we don't remember that much from being kids, right? And one of my childhood memories is of that beauty in juxtaposition with that kind of concrete uniformity
Right.
of the military presence. So when I heard you speak, when I heard about your project, it evoked a lot in me. Not only as somebody that's had this childhood experience, but I also forged a lot of my early identity around being a Puerto Rican nationalist. I identify differently today, but it was such an important part of who I was and how I walked in the world. And so nationalism, nature, climate, beauty, military presence, having a name in your family line. Um, Tell me, like, how do you confront all of this? How are you making meaning of it all?
Well, so often there's an urge by people who talk to me around the project that I firmly ground it in some sort of personal narrative. Who Howard K. Knox, that's the general that the base was named after, is to me. Who is he in my family narrative? And the truth is, well, we are somewhere deep in our history somehow related. The Ramey name is not that, it's a rare enough name to know that we must somehow be related. But his family history, so much as I can gather it, is very different from my family history. So I'm not really that interested, and I'm honestly not that interested in centering the film around him. It's more about this using this bizarre coincidence to think very deeply about how my country has behaved in the last century and into this century to create the current circumstances that we are living in. And using that springboard of the same name to, in a sense, justify this investigation. All ideas start somewhere, and this idea started with this horrible realization that the border patrol site, whatever it's called, was located in a place that had this name, Ramey Border Patrol, and also, and everything around it. When you go to Aguadilla, to San Antonio, that's all you see is my name, which is extremely strange. And disorienting. So trying to pick at that disorientation as a starting point for the investigation, as opposed to making it all about that.
I understand.
So, and then the beauty. I mean, Puerto Rico is shockingly beautiful, despite 120 years of occupation by the military and of what I essentially think of as land grabs by corporate monopolies, and of, Monsanto's, experimental farming in which they, pollute the land. There's so much pollution, and yet you could plant anything in the soil there and it could grow. I mean, it's amazingly resilient, like the Puerto Ricans themselves, and resists even the most heinous of occupations. There's this kind of amazing story, and I don't know if it's true, I didn't follow up on it, that my friend told me the last time I was there. She said the Africanized bees came to Puerto Rico, and scientists have been studying them, and they have found that something about being in Puerto Rico has pacified, has made them,
That is awesome.
has made them kind. And I was like, that is an amazing metaphor for Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
That it's
Yes.
somehow this place, it's so beautiful. And even in anger, I have found everyone that I have met there so kind and thoughtful.
Yeah.
So it's an amazing place, and I just want to honor it and fulfill an obligation that I feel I now have to try to get some greater awareness and understanding.